stories start in the most unexpected ways. This is one of them. It's the story of how a dispute over a small piece of land owned by a religious monk, well, it escalated into one of the most important legal battles of the 20th century, a case that would ultimately save a nation's constitution from its own government.
So let me ask you this, and it's a question at the very heart of this story. Does a government, elected by the people, have the power to change anything it wants? Or are some principles so fundamental, so core to a nation's identity, that they should be forever untouchable? One landmark case in India dared to answer that very question.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at the core conflict, then trace this whole thing back to its wild origins with that monk I mentioned. We'll dive into the legal tug-of-war that led up to this moment, check out the incredibly high-stakes arguments, and finally uncover the revolutionary idea that changed everything. At its heart, this entire story really boils down to a massive collision between two incredibly powerful ideas: the absolute authority of an elected government versus the permanent guiding promises of a constitution. And the two sides could not have been further apart. On one hand, you had the government claiming its power was nearly absolute, that Parliament could scrap fundamental rights and even, get this, replace democracy with one-party rule. On the other hand, the petitioners argued that the Constitution's whole purpose was to grant citizens freedoms meant to subsist forever, to protect them from the tyranny of the representatives of the people.
So how did this monumental constitutional crisis even begin? You might think it was some big political movement or a popular uprising, right? Nope. It actually all started with a single individual and a dispute over his property.
Okay, so it's March 1970. His Holiness Keshavanand Bharati, the head of a religious institution, files a petition. He's just trying to challenge some new land reform laws in the state of Kerala that affect his institution's property. Pretty straightforward stuff. But while his case is slowly moving through the courts, the central government passes a whole series of constitutional amendments, giving itself sweeping new powers. And just like that, his simple property dispute snowballs into a massive, direct challenge to Parliament's authority over the Constitution itself.
And this isn't just some abstract legal theory. It all started with this very document. A simple writ petition filed to protect a single property became the incredibly unlikely spark for a constitutional showdown that would literally decide the fate of India's democracy. It's pretty wild.
Now, this conflict definitely didn't just appear out of thin air. The Supreme Court and the government had been wrestling with this exact question for decades. This case was really the final, decisive round in a long, drawn-out legal tug-of-war. The court's position on this had been like a pendulum swinging back and forth. Back in 1951, in a case called Sankari Prasad, the court said Parliament's power to amend was pretty much unlimited, green light. But then, in 1967, in the Goloknath case, it did a complete 180. The court slammed on the brakes and said Parliament had no power to take away fundamental rights. This major contradiction basically set the stage for a final showdown. So when the case finally reached a historic 13-judge bench, the largest in India's history, the court was presented with two drastically different visions for the entire country. The arguments were stark, and the stakes, well, they could not have been higher.
The government's position was just one of near total power. Their lawyers essentially argued that Parliament, as the voice of the people, could change any part of the Constitution. They claimed this power was so absolute it even included the authority to abolish basic rights and replace democracy itself. Let that sink in for a second.
But the petitioner's counter-argument was this incredibly powerful defense of constitutionalism. They argued that the Constitution wasn't just a rule book, it was a permanent promise. Its most fundamental principles were put there specifically to protect citizens from the government getting too powerful, no matter how popular that government might be.
So, how did the court solve this epic clash? The decision was, well, it was ingenious. Instead of a clear win for one side, the judges created a brand new doctrine that wouldn't just change law in India forever, but would go on to influence courts all around the world.
And that solution was this revolutionary idea, the basic structure doctrine. It was a brilliant compromise. The court said, yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution, but, and this is the game-changing part, that power doesn't let them alter or destroy its basic structure.
The best way to think about it is like a building. Imagine the Constitution as a house. An elected government can make changes. It can renovate, it can repaint the walls, it can even add a new floor if needed. But what it cannot do is take a sledgehammer to the foundation. It can't knock down the core pillars that hold the whole thing up. So what is this foundation? Well, the court pointed to the big, core principles laid out right in the preamble of the Constitution. things like the nation's sovereignty, its democratic and republican government, and the unbreakable commitment to justice, liberty, and equality. This is the essential stuff, the very soul of the Constitution that can't be amended away.
And so, in this landmark judgment on April 24, 1973, the court made its final declaration. Parliament's power, while vast, has limits. The power to amend is not the power to destroy. The basic identity of the Constitution was officially ruled to be unbreakable.
Now, while this case settled a huge legal question in India, it leaves us all with a really profound thought, doesn't it? In any democracy, what ideas are so fundamental, so absolutely central to a nation's identity that they should be placed beyond the reach of any government, no matter how popular? What forms the unbreakable core of a nation's promise to its people?